time out we're recording here. Perfect. Yeah, thank you again for taking time out of your day to attend this session on design thinking presented by Billy Dunn at Ford. My name is Joe Badalini, and I'm the career consultant for the Career and Professional Development Center at CMU. We have other CPDC colleagues on the line as well, so thank you all for joining. Throughout this conversation, just so you know, this will be recorded and available to you afterwards. So not to worry if you miss a topic or a note, but we'll make that available to you afterwards. And then throughout the presentation, feel free to chime in with a question in the chat box. We'll do our best to take questions in real time as we go along. And then I'm sure at the very end, we'll have 10 or 15 minutes to take questions, comments as well. All right, but yes, thank you very much for being here. This is actually our second session of the CPDC Summer Seminar series, and we're very excited and grateful to have Ford with us today. And just by nature of why we're here today, we thought we'd share a few points with you about the inception of the CPDC Summer Seminars. Well, of course, we understand as a career center that many students were negatively impacted by COVID-19. So we as an office, we came together to figure out what can we do to help students who have been impacted, whether your internship was canceled or maybe even delayed or shortened, whatever that situation may be. So we thought what a great way to come together to develop seminars that will help you develop practical skills for the workplace. So we want to make sure that you are maintaining pace with your degree and your goals towards a career by offering these seminars to help you be proactive in your skill attainment, whether that's design thinking or project management, communication skills. So that's why we've offered this summer seminar series to help you maintain pace towards your goals. And again, this is our second session, and we have over 10 sessions scheduled. So after this one is over, feel free to continue engaging with this program. They'll be occurring throughout the summer, and we're happy to share more with you about the other remaining seminars along the way. All right, so any comments, questions about that before we begin? This is being recorded. Again, once we start, we will have a recorded live session. All right, great. So let's move forward with our speaker. Without further ado, we are very happy to introduce to you Billy Dunn, Talent Specialist for Ford University Relations. We have a few points and facts about Billy that I'd like to share with you today. So again, Talent Specialist at Ford Motor Company. Billy has been working on the University Relations team, supporting the company's mission to attract, onboard, and engage the best and brightest talent to advance the spirit of innovation at Ford. Before starting at Ford, Billy actually spent 15 years nearly working in government and higher ed. And I think, Billy, correct me if I'm wrong, you spent some time in residence life, so great. Welcome back to the higher ed side here today. Billy has graduate degrees from University of Connecticut and The Ohio State University, competes in strongman and Olympic weightlifting competitions in his personal time, and also has a rescue dog named Bear. And we really hope that Bear will be making a special guest appearance today. So we look forward to seeing Bear there, Billy. But yes, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. Again, we appreciate your time, your talent, your knowledge. So feel free. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and allow you to share your slides.
So I do thank everybody for the opportunity to speak with you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I feel a little bit like I'm recording a vlog or something right now. So if I ask you to, leave a like, drop some thoughts in the comments, or smash the subscribe button, I apologize if I just fall into habit there. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about design thinking. I do hope we have some basic knowledge. I hope you've got some curiosity about it, and hopefully in this presentation I will answer some of the major questions around design thinking. I did want to note that I was kind of prompted that, again, you may all have some projects you're working on this summer, some different things you're looking into this summer. So hopefully these questions will prompt how you can use design thinking as you go through your summer and beyond. So just to take a moment to kind of set some context for how and why Ford Motor Company uses and is benefited by design thinking. For those of you who don't know, we are a company that's been around for over a century. That's 110 years or more of iterations. And so iterations is one of the things we'll talk about being important to how you use design thinking. And so I think when you have a product line and a process that has been evolving for over a century, you can't help but bring that design thinking mindset into it. Our scale, if you're not familiar with Ford, we are one of the largest companies in the world. I added the $150 billion in revenue just to give you a clear picture of just how much business we do, and that means how many customers we have around the globe. We're going to talk a lot about how knowing your customers, getting to really understand what your customers are looking for, is going to drive how you use design thinking. So I think that that's important for us to know that not only do we have a ton of customers, but we also have a ton of responsibility around the globe. I mentioned there that we have manufacturing facilities in 18 countries. So that's a global spectrum of how we're going to connect with people, how we're going to learn, how we're going to listen. And all of those are going to be important when we talk about what design thinking is. Again, you can see on our people portion there, we have 188,000 employees, again, on every continent except for Antarctica. So we do have, again, stakeholders at every level on every continent. So again, as we talk about using your stakeholders to get information, to get insight, to get the practical pieces of how you're going to design and build the next iteration, that's an important consideration for us. And then finally, for marketplace, the thing that really drives who we are here at Ford, especially around design thinking, is that we have to compete on a global scale. This is something where we can't just keep turning out, the same product year after year process, or we have to continue to evolve, we have to continue to adapt, and we have to continue to compete against competitors that are always bringing something new to the table. So again, I wanted to kind of set the stage for A, who we are, and B, why design thinking is important to us. So let's look a little bit at what, where design thinking has succeeded. If you haven't heard of IDEO, I encourage you to look into them. They are the hub of design thinking. They're the ones that have done it the most and done it the best. We here at Ford, we always turn to IDEO for everything from resources to ideas to examples. And I just pulled a couple here of things that IDEO has really helped shape how we use the modern world through design thinking. They were brought in as consultants to work on the first laptops. They were the ones that worked with Apple to not just shape the mouse, but create the mouse, to take the computer from just a line item code-based system to a graphical user interface with a physical component. That was what the mouse did for all of us. So if you're using a mouse right now, whether it's a trackpad, whether it's a, just something you're able to use to surf around a screen, you have IDEO, and to a large degree, you have design thinking to thank for that. Same thing for the Palm Pilot. If you have an Android or iPhone that you're watching this on, you wouldn't have that without the work that they did to make handheld devices smarter, faster, and easier for people to use. One that I'm always so thankful for is the work that IDEO did around shopping carts. For decades, the shopping cart was one thing. It was one specific piece of equipment. And now when you go into a shopping, I haven't been in a shopping center in a while, but if you can remember going into shopping centers, you have options now. There are things that have changed about the shopping cart that when I was a kid, they were one thing. Now there's a lot of different resources and formats that you can use a shopping cart with. And again, IDEO is how we went from one thing to a variety of uses and functions around the shopping cart. The one that I wanted to take a moment on is Steelcase. For those of you that are not familiar with Steelcase, they're the company that kind of revolutionized the office. So if you've been in an office setting that's like an open concept, or even a nicer form of cubicles, that's probably thanks to the work that IDEO and Steelcase did together back in the 90s. Our CEO here at Ford, Jim Hackett, was CEO of Steelcase at the time. And when you think about what the office looks like today, if you watch old episodes of TV or movies, even from the 60s and 70s, you'll see an office that doesn't look anything like we work in today. And Steelcase and IDEO really did lead the way on that by working with employees, working with employers, and trying to figure out how what we were used to could be changed. And so as we get into the nuts and bolts of design thinking, we'll talk a little bit more about how that actually takes place. So I do want to give you a kind of a Ford specific example, just to see how an item can progress through design thinking. So if you see here at the beginning of the timeline, we have the Model T. If you look at that seat, it's a standard stock bench. You're not going to move it. There's no fancy features. I pulled up the PDF of the instruction booklet for the Model T. There's not a single thing about the seat. So for the first iteration of the car here at Ford, the seat was literally a bench. It was just something that you were going to sit on. As we progressed as a company building cars, we progressed to what we thought of as what we could do with our seats. So flash forward 50 years, you start seeing cars like the Thunderbird. I've got the Mustang here, where not only was it a bench, but now it's a bucket that you can adjust. So you see here, these seats have been, maybe the driver's a little shorter than the passenger. In the old model, that wouldn't have worked, but thanks to the revolutionary design of putting seats on their own tracks, we were able to adjust seats that way. You flash forward another 30 years, and the company recognized that you don't need the controls to be on the seat anymore. The controls were on the seat because that was the only functional way to do it. So they moved the controls to the door, where they'd be a little easier for people to access. And again, this is when we talk about design thinking, one of the words that we like to use is human-centered design. So again, the human part of the component is, I don't want to have to reach under my seat to adjust it. If you've driven a car from the 80s, even the 90s, I guess, you have to maybe pull a track and it'll slide the seat up. Through design thinking, various adaptations were put in place. So now all you have to do is push a little button and the seat will change. You don't have to actually manipulate the physical entity that you're sitting on. You manipulate it through another device. And then now with our memory seats, this is where if I use my key to start the car, to remote start the car, it can automatically know, okay, Billy's coming. I need to move the seat back. I need to lower it. If Tracy starts the car, I need to bring the seat up, bring it closer to the steering wheel. Again, that's in less than 110 years, we've gone from a straight bench seat that's literally just looks like a couch that would fit into a moving carriage, to now a car that knows exactly how I want my chair and can set it to it specifically by me starting the car. So again, just a quick overview of how these things progress, how design thinking can help you take something that exists today and find a way to make it a little bit better through a little bit more of that human-centered design. So when we talk about design thinking, we're really looking at a balance. And so that balance, I like to use the language here of the possible, the preferred, and the practical. So the possible is, what can it functionally do? What is the level of capacity that whether it's a process, whether it's a product, whether it's a program, what is it actually capable of doing? And so as you're looking at this aspect, there are some questions here that you can use. You can ask, what functions have already been introduced? What are the things that maybe exist but people aren't using well? What can we do with a minimal change? What can we do that isn't going to require reinventing the process, but it's a few small changes. So again, that's the possible. For IDEO, I've got the design, their language over here between feasibility, viability, and desirability. So that's kind of, I think the possible, preferred, and practical might stick a little bit more, but you do have IDEOs there. For preferred, this is again the human part of human-centered design. So when we look at our customers or our users, how are they actually desiring, so how are they preferring to use our product? The other question there that I think is very valuable is what are the needs they have that aren't being met? At the end of the day, design thinking is about how we take a human who has very real concerns, considerations, and capacities, and how we build our products to meet their needs. And so if you have a product or a process that you're working on this summer, that's an easy question to ask is, what do I need, or what does my customer need, or what does my manager need that this isn't doing right now? Because if you can start to identify those things, you can start to identify where you can use design thinking. And then the final component here is the practical. And so that's less about the product, but more about where my organization is, or where my team is capable of getting to in the current state. So there's a difference between possible and practical. And so I think we'll take a look at maybe a continuum that'll help kind of put this into place a little bit more. So I'm using the language here, how we work and how it works, because again, this is human-centered design. So when I say we, I mean the human part of the equation. And for that, that could be your customer, that could be your teammates, that could be any of the people that you're working towards a better product for. So again, this is based on human conditions, human needs, which can always be influenced by training. They can be influenced by limitations, or it could just be what somebody, is conditioned to, or is familiar with, or wants to do. So that's the left-hand side of the equation there. On the right-hand side, I've got how it works. And again, that's the mechanical component, whether it's an actual product, it can be the process, but it is the grounded object upon which you would be working with design thinking. So then in the middle there, I've got the practical. And so again, that's the difference between the possible being what your product actually does. The practical is more of what is the universe capable of, so to speak? What is possible specifically for what you're working on? So I've got a couple of examples here. If we think about the seat idea, that Model T is the top area there, where humans work in many different ways. I noted that I'm 6 foot tall, my partner is 5'5", 5'6". So when we sit in the car, we need 2 different areas. But in 1908, the Model T was really only going to give you that one set system, because that's where the possibility lied. The evolution and adapting the bucket seat allowed us to make the separate adjustments. So maybe that's that middle line. And then as we get into the era of computers, we get into the era of memory, we get into the area of automation, that's where you would see that bottom line, where the practical is now moving farther over to how I want things to work rather than how the machine needs things to work. So here at Ford, we use this wheel that I really like that it's a wheel. As we get started looking at how to use design thinking, I like to stress that it is cyclical. You're never going to be done. You're only going to be working on iterations. So I'm not going to dive too deep into these concepts because we're going to go through each one here in a second. But as we start to think about how you get from the bench seat to the seats that remember who sits where, you want to keep these 5 key components in mind. So the first one there is that central question. Here at Ford, we like to use a how might we model. And so as we talk about the central question, I'll talk about how might. As we look at the themes and insights, we're going to take a look at how maybe you already know something that is a concern, but how you can also explore and find new ideas that you can work towards. For ideas and prototype, we're talking here about what you're actually going to come up with to then start using the design thinking model to work towards. Test and refine, that's where you're going to actually get to go out and look at how your ideas fit with other people's practices. And then finally, research and inspiration. That's where you get to really see if you actually created something that's going to make an impact, or if you need to start the wheel over again. So let's look at the first one here with the framing the central question. So for this one, what I like to say is, again, here at Ford, we use how might we questions. So for some of you, you might have a program or a project this summer that's really easy to ask that kind of question. So, for us, a recent design thinking exercise was how might we onboard interns virtually? And so that required us to really start to look at a variety of different solutions. But then, if you see here on the second bullet point here, it says the question must be revisited and refined throughout the project. So it goes from just how might we onboard 600 interns virtually to now how might we onboard 600 interns virtually while getting them the tech they need, while getting them the support they need. So as you start to frame the central question, you may realize there's not just one question, but there's levels to the question. Um, but what you want to make sure is, if you see on that first bullet point, you want to make sure that we're actually addressing something that's a real problem. It's the real, you know, you're getting to a challenge that is going to lead to solutions. There's a lot of times where you can ask a question that isn't going to get you into the a productive space. It gets you more into a philosophical space, or it gets you more to a, you know, a challenge that's beyond what you're actually going to do, whether it's, you know, in a summer or in a career. So you want to make sure that you're using these questions to get into what can often be called a wicked problem, or, as I mentioned earlier, an unmet need. The other question here, you see a couple more questions to use this summer there at the bottom. How does this align with your overall strategy? You can spend a lot of time developing a solution to a problem your company, your organization, your team doesn't really need to address at the time. If you're looking at how you can make something cheaper or how you can make something quicker, it's not gonna benefit you to spend all your time addressing a question of how do we add new features or how do we add new capabilities, when the question really is, how might we make this product faster? So make sure that you're asking a question that is aligned with what your strategy is as an organization. And then I think this last one's important. Is this something that you're going to pursue? Is this something that you're going to want to, you know, is your central question something that you are going to want to walk through the 4 steps that we're going to address, that you're going to want to really spend your time and energy on? If it doesn't, it may be worth talking with your team. It may be worth going back to the start of your frame, your central question, and finding a new way to ask it. So again, if how might we onboard 600 interns virtually isn't what's going to be inspiring or worth pursuing to you, you know, you may have to find a component of the question that is. So it may be, again, how might we get the tech needs in place for 600 people to work virtually? So I think that's a great way to start this whole process, is knowing that you have your work cut out ahead of you when you frame the central question. So make sure it's a question that actually feels like you're gonna carry it through. So getting into the functional processes that make up design thinking, we go into kind of that, we go into that purple section there, kind of the top left, the themes and insights area. So the key piece, again, as I mentioned with design thinking, is it's human-centered design. So you need to be open to working with other humans to figure out what their design needs are. If you just go into it with your own understanding of things, your own assumptions, you're not going to be good at design thinking. Yes, you're going to take the information you may already have about something. If you're trying to design a new software app, yes, you may want to look at how you use apps personally, but you're also going to need to gather information and identify how other people are going to use your software, your platform, your app. Because eventually you're going to have to find solutions for other people, not just for yourself. And so that is where we start to explore new perspectives. So the key piece here is, you know, you might have an idea in your central question, but through interviews, through focus groups, through sitting down and reading, you know, maybe you go online and you find message boards around the topic here, and you're just finding all of these different voices to listen to. You may find these themes or patterns that may really speak to the unmet needs that you don't personally see as an unmet need. You know, I always like to think about, if I was to hand my grandmother an iPhone for the first time, you know, it's something that when I picked up an iPhone for the first time, I was able to pretty quickly figure it out and, you know, open apps and things like that. But there are a lot of people that if you hand them an iPhone for the first time, they're going to need a lot more support. They have a lot more unmet needs than you. So that's why it's important to do that research, to get into your customers, get into your community, to see what unmet needs you may have met. You know, they may not be unmet needs for you, but for other people, they might be obvious. So I think the key piece here is these last couple of questions really do set the stage for you to ask, how is my central question going to be answered through conversation, communication, and listening to people outside of my own circle, outside of my team? Because at the end of the day, you know, I mentioned at Ford, we're a global company. If we only listen to one population, we're missing out on all of the other people who are going to use our products and use our processes. So again, that's the key point here when we talk about identifying themes and insights, is you have to be open to listening. You have to be open to exploring and getting in from your potential customers. So we move from identifying the themes and insights over to our ideas and prototypes. So again, this is where you get to really be creative. One of the biggest things about design thinking is it calls for creativity. It doesn't just, it isn't just, you know, a recipe or an instruction manual. It's something where you have to challenge yourself to come up with ideas that may be outlandish, may be, you know, completely unthinkable, but you want to start in your initial efforts. You want to start thinking as broadly and as out there as possible. I always think of there's a quote that gets attributed to Ernest Hemingway, that you write drunk and then you edit sober. I think that you can take that advice, not literally, but in many ways you can kind of take the spirit of that advice when you look at design thinking, that you want to brainstorm wild. You want to just let anything that comes to your mind as a potential solution wind up on a Post-it note or on a sheet of paper somewhere. And then you can down the road, you can look at them and say, you know, this wasn't possible, but we might have found something that's relevant. I did a session with some high school students where we asked them, you know, how might we make cars safer for teenage drivers? And at one table, they were talking about what happens when you crash. At another table, they were talking about what happens when something breaks down. That's the beauty of this, is when you're brainstorming things, it doesn't have to be just one thing that you're brainstorming on. So again, let the initial efforts just be unlimited, because you can find some value down the road. And so then as we look at this last question here under the first bullet, are these relevant ideas that you're coming up with? Again, you're gonna start broad, but then you're gonna take all of the ideas that you've come up with and start looking for the ones that are most relevant. As you've talked with your customers, maybe your potential customers, your potential users, maybe they've given you a concept that now that you have all of your brainstorming done, maybe you're able to put those two things together and you're able to, you know, find those unmet needs. You're able to uncover potential solutions through the brainstorming. At Ford, we love Post-it notes. That's one of the things that make brainstorming possible for us. So if you've got an opportunity in your current position to sit down with, you know, a couple of folks from your team and just ask, how might we, questions that lead to these brainstorming exercises. Again, don't limit it. Make sure it's an opportunity to really go wild here. Then you're going to take all this idea and create, you know, for the purposes of this presentation, we call them low fidelity examples, but we're really talking about prototypes. We're really talking about, you know, how you can frame something for people so that you're not just trying to explain it to them, but you're able to walk through. So if you're coming up with an app, that's going to be the wireframe, where you're gonna you know, walk someone through what the app would actually do. You're not going to design and code the entire app. You're going to come up with that wireframe visualization that might give somebody something they can look at. If you're coming up with an actual device or an actual machine, that's where you would come up with maybe a balsa wood prototype or even a paper prototype. I mentioned that high school event that we did where, you know, one of the groups I was working with came up with an app so that if something breaks down on the car, it automatically feeds you as the driver, it feeds you kind of the information you would need to check on. Is it the tire pressure? Is it the fuel pressure? So again, they were able to draw out an app that would have, step-by-step processes around that. So again, you want to take paper, you want to take something that's low, low tech but high touch, so that people can really understand the opportunity that your solution is going to create for them. And then this last piece here around creating multiple prototypes is important, because when you're brainstorming, and then even when you're creating prototypes, you may see something specifically one way. And if you're too wedded to that one idea, if you're too committed early on in the process, you're going to lose some of the functionality of design thinking, because you're only going to have one set of ideas, one set of uses available and open for the next steps here. So again, the key pieces here are, make sure that as you're coming up with ideas, you're not limiting yourself. The second piece here is make sure you're being open as you build your prototypes, as you come up with things you can show to people, things you can walk people through. You're not too wedded to any one specific idea, but you're able to take it in multiple directions so that you can walk people through with some flexibility. All right, so then we're going to get into the test and refine portion, which is that red, the red southeast corner there. So again, I mentioned you want to have multiple options. You want to have a couple of different solutions. So again, if you're how might we question identified a central problem around how we get the tech in place for 600 people to work virtually, you may have a couple of different options here that you would walk people through. A lot of problems you're not going to be able to actually do something more than once. So it's important that as you're brainstorming and as you're refining these ideas, you're walking through iterations of possibilities and prototypes, so that when you get to your actual solution, you've had the opportunities to test where the issues might be. The second bullet point here, where we talk about the key concepts addressing the central question, you may realize you've come up with a solution to a completely different problem. So again, that's why it's important to have that central question in place, so that your solutions actually work towards what you're trying to meet here. If you have a summer-long project and your supervisor or the sponsor or whoever's helping you through this project has a specific goal or a specific need in mind, as you're going through all these steps, you're going to want to make sure that your solution is what you're going to propose is a solution for that actual need. And then this next piece here is around making sure the users that you're testing with are the users that will eventually use your product or service. So again, if your project this summer is related to to a specific population, so maybe it's retirees, you don't want to just use other college students as test users for your solution or for your ideas. You want to walk through some actual retirees. You want to walk through with people who are going to use your system or your process in the way that it's going to actually be used. We mentioned this already, is you do have to keep the business realities in mind. If your solution is going to cost $1,000 per person and you only have a budget of $10 per person, you have to go back into the testing phase. You have to go back into you have to refine your process to get it much closer to what the realities of your situation are. And then so the piece here, the key pieces here are, use the actual users to test your ideas, to test your prototypes that you came up with in that prototyping phase. Use the people that will actually be taking advantage of your opportunity here. And then so we get into the last phase of our wheel here, which is kind of after you've proposed your solution, after you've gotten into what you think is going to be the solution, you need to understand, you need to listen. And so just as at the beginning, you had to listen, you had to understand, you had to ask the right questions of the people that will be using it. You need to do that again on the back end here. And so the key pieces here are, what are the behaviors you're observing? When you were brainstorming, when you were coming up with your ideas, you probably had a picture in your mind of how people were going to use your product or your solution. You need to now see how people are actually using it, because they weren't in the brainstorming sessions. They didn't have the full context. They didn't have the full guidance that you and your team might have had as you were coming up with the solution. They're going to fall back on, as we think about that balance between how the process works and how people work, they're always going to fall back on how people work. If you can think about, again, some of the considerations around the car seat, if you're somebody that's always used the slider on the car seat, you might have to have someone explain to you why the new door solution is going to be valuable. If you've never used, if you buy a new car and you've never used that kind of seat control, it's going to take a little training or a little understanding to get to use that. So as a design thinker, you have to build that in. You have to be sensitive to how people might actually use your product and build towards that with your solutions here. So again, this is the part of the wheel where you're either going to acknowledge your successes, or you're going to kind of start over to admit your defeats. So again, as you get ready to complete your projects this summer, it may be really valuable to be able to hand over something to your supervisor or project sponsor that really does show that you've talked with the potential users for your solution, and you've been able to identify where whoever works on this project next is going to need to look at the solution through new perspectives. So again, this is the broad processes in place for how we use design thinking here at Ford. Again, it's a wheel. It's not something where you can ever be truly done, but you can always be building new processes and building new opportunities for your customer and for the people that use your products or use your processes to get a little bit more value for how they want to use things, not just how you want to build things. So as we look at how, it's important to also maybe identify some of the times when design thinking is most valuable. So here's 3 options here. The first one here is a feasibility gap. The second one is, again, as I mentioned, a wicked problem. And then there's always an opportunity if you're part of a team that has a lack of action. So the first one there, the feasibility gap, got a little display here. Again, going back to this idea of how we work versus how your item, process, product works. If you can identify when there's a gap between what's possible and what's standard, you have a great opportunity around design thinking. If you can think of, there's plenty of examples over the last 5 or 10 years, but I think the most realistic example is this right now. The industry standard has been, maybe you use video conference calls when necessary, but for the most part, you go into a meeting room and you sit down and talk with people. Well, that's not where the industry standard lives right now. So the limit of feasibility, where the industry standard really is going to be, is now what we're doing right now with video conferencing and leveraging technology in that space. So again, this is a feasibility gap that we're exploring right now. How do we work as humans in a more technical friendly space? And we've had to do this because it's been forced upon us by COVID, but as we return to normal, how can we still use this new tech capacity to move that element of what's possible and what's preferred? So again, that's one area. Another area is, again, this idea of a wicked problem. You know, I threw this picture in because, again, as we've seen over the last couple of months, you know, the problem isn't that people run out of toilet paper. The problem is that supply chains can't keep up with disruptions upstream, or our marketplaces can't keep up with when there's a spike in demand. So again, the problem isn't people run out of toilet paper. The wicked problem is our supply chains don't work in a crisis mode. So that's something that, again, when we look at design thinking as a tool to, as Don Norman here says, step back and take a broader look, you know, think of how design thinking can help you address the root causes of things, the bigger picture of things. And then I think the other area, and this could be very valuable for you this summer, is if you're part of a team where there's a lack of progress, design thinking is a great opportunity because it demands action. It isn't just something where you know, it's a 9-month-long project with a lot of meetings and a lot of you know, minutia or hierarchy. It's an opportunity for you at any level to introduce human-centered design elements to make real-world process adaptation or progress, because anyone can do it. Anyone can listen to the customer. Anyone can sit down and brainstorm. Anyone can take a few, you know, a couple hours to build a wireframe design or a prototype of a tool. Anyone can do this. It isn't limited to only those people that have the opportunity. So I think those are the 3 key areas. There's plenty of other areas where design thinking is going to be exceptionally valuable. But for you in the summer, I think it's especially valuable because, again, you may not have you know, the power, so to speak. You may not have the normal opportunity, but you still have the opportunity to approach things through this human-centered mindset. And so I hope that that's given you some basic understanding, some basic introduction. I do want to take a moment to identify what qualities can make people excel at design thinking. So again, here's a resource or an image from IDEO. Again, the ideation phase is, again, how we come up with things. So what that can take is a patient mind or an open mind, because again, you're going to have a lot of, you know, if you're on a team or even if you're an individual, you're going to have a lot of conflicting thoughts. You're going to have a lot of different ideas coming together at once. So being able to patiently work through a variety of different suggestions and not just kind of shoot people down or you know, rush to one solution, that's where that patience and open-minded. Observant, you know, again, I mentioned that you're going to have a lot of time talking to customers, talking to you know, people that are going to use your product. This is where being observant is important, because you need to identify trends. You need to identify challenges that people might not even speak to themselves, but through that pattern recognition, you're going to be able to see how a solution could be right under people's noses and they're just not noticing it. And then obviously when you're ideating, when you're brainstorming, when you're coming up with ideas, creativity is a huge need, if not a huge opportunity there. So if you're looking to build your strengths in anywhere, I'd stress those as being key to you know, design thinking. The other piece here is inspiration. Again, this is where you're getting your understanding, your ideas around what the problem actually is. This is where you're coming up with questions to ask your customers. This is where you're coming up with the opportunities that your customer needs that support in that moment. So that's why empathy is a huge piece for this. If you listen to someone and can really hear what their problem is, it's going to make you that much better at coming up with a solution for it. And then finally, for the implementation phase, this is the one where I probably struggle the most with. It's important to have someone on your team. If it's not you, it's important to have someone on your team that has that project management experience or expertise or experience. As I mentioned earlier, you know, this is a process that does take some commitment, and you need to have someone there that's going to be able to organize that for you. And so that project management organization is really important. And then finally, the energy. This is something where you're going to have to either find it in yourself or find an external energy source to make sure that you can get through the process as a whole. So I know this is a very broad overview. It's a very broad introduction. I do hope there's some good questions that'll help us maybe narrow down or find some real world examples. So if there's any questions, I did just want to throw out a quick plug. You know, connect with us on LinkedIn, follow Life at Ford on Instagram, and of course, look for our jobs on careers.ford.com.
Great. Well, Billy, thank you so much for your time. A great content presentation. We really appreciate it. At this point, we do have a good 15 minutes or so to take questions. So if you have questions, comments, thoughts, please do put them in the chat box. But Billy, we did have a few that came through during the presentation, so I'll go ahead and start us off with the Q&A. So we had a really interesting question. You spoke earlier about the 3 Ps, and oftentimes people, we may not know what we don't, or we may not know what we need, essentially. So in that process, how can you leverage and adapt the 3 Ps to help people understand what they may not know they need?
Sure. And so again, this is when I mentioned that you have to listen to folks. You have to really sit down with your customers. You have to do, like I said, focus groups. That's where you have to develop questions and really listen to answers, because someone may be telling you they, you know, can never get something to download right. But when you start to really listen, you're finding out that maybe they're not going through the right processes. So someone might tell you that their problem is X, but through that process of listening, you can find out that their problem is really Y. And so if you go into it just trying to solve X, you're never actually going to get them a solution, because what they're telling you is their problem is not their problem. And so when we talk about, you know, if you see here in the bullet, how do our customers actually want to use something, or, you know, what are their actual needs? That's where it's important on you as you're working on your project or anything in the future, to make sure that you're really getting clear with your customer base on what the problem they have is, what the need they have is, and not just taking their word for it. Because again, a lot of people will tell you, you know, so again, going back to the toilet paper idea, a lot of people will tell you, oh, you know, the problem was people hoarding toilet paper. Well, if you look into the problem, maybe there's a completely different issue that you need to help solve.
Great, thank you. Yeah, good insight, and I really appreciate it throughout the whole presentation. It's very clear that whether you're working in engineering as an engineer, or software development, or even within marketing, human resources, so this whole methodology of design thinking is really applicable for any functional area profession. So definitely very helpful.
And that's I mean, that's definitely something that here at Ford, every skill team, like you said, whether it's human resources, whether it's manufacturing, this is the model we use now. So we all ask how might we questions now. It's not just, you know, it's not just an engineering team somewhere that's, you know, trying to use design thinking to make the steering wheel better or something. It's how is my team going to recruit better? How is Comp and Ben going to make our payroll processes more human-centered? Because at the end of the day, everything can be adapted to humans. You know, so much of what we do, and I think this is, let me go to the next slide. You know, this is that battle. Is so much of what we do exists to serve the process. It exists to serve the machines. But as we move the potential, we are now able to serve how humans work, how we want to use things, more than just how the machines are, or what the machines are capable of, what the processes are capable of.
Right. And we did have, based on what you were saying, Sharon, earlier, we had another follow-up question. Let's pretend, for example, we're doing a focus group and really trying to evaluate and understand what customers are communicating and really wanting. What happens if there doesn't really seem to be a solid consensus on what they want? So maybe participant A really wants XYZ and participant B really wants ABC. So
Sure.
what would you do at that point to understand those variances?
Sure. So this is, I think, where you get into your brainstorming and your prototyping. So again, as I mentioned, you may have more than one prototype. You may have a prototype that addresses ABC and a prototype that addresses DEF. And so as you're going back in the the test and refine phases, you may bring both of those, and ABC problem solver may actually cover a lot of everybody's issues. DEF may only cover a small subset of your customer's problems. And so at the end of the day, we talk about iterations. This iteration may only be able to answer ABC. It may only realistically, functionally, within the bounds of your project, answer the question for ABC, but you at least have the understanding that there is still a need. So when you come around for your next iteration, now you can maybe start to try and answer some of those secondary questions.
Right. And in terms of that feedback iteration process, in what ways does Ford actually collect feedback from customers, clients?
Sure.
What kind of methodologies do you use, or tools even?
Sure. So again, we do have a ton of focus groups and market use data. We're actually, you're seeing a lot more in the automotive space, thanks to a certain electric car manufacturer. You're seeing a lot more companies getting comfortable using the actual car data. When you buy a connected car now, you can sign up to give information back to the company. So again, other companies have pioneered this. We're now getting involved and getting invested in using the actual car data, because just as we were just talking about a moment ago, where someone may swear up and down the issue is ABC, if we pull the car data, well, the issue may actually be DEF. So that's one of the ways that we've really enhanced and advanced our abilities to understand how people use our products. Same thing for our dealers, same thing for Ford Credit. We're able to track so much more now through what the tech is capable of on our websites, on the various avenues that people connect with us on now. So again, it is going to the data, not just to what people want you to think the data is. So anytime you can have data sets, anytime you can have that information in a hard form, that is going to be a valuable. It's not going to replace what humans tell you, but it can amplify and clarify what humans are telling you.
Right.
It's a great question.
And we had another great question, and for some context, we do have a lot of students on this call who are potentially participating in a project-based course this summer. So a lot of them are asking great questions about probably the nature of their own projects they're working on.
Sure.
So we just had one question. How do you specifically, or just Ford in general, how do you recruit participants for focus groups, or what does that look like?
Sure. So we have a bulk mail capacity across the company. So again, when I mentioned there's 188,000 employees, that is very helpful for the process. I personally have gotten involved with a couple of these focus groups and different, as we've moved into the COVID era, it's much more survey based. But I always appreciated the opportunity to go into our research facilities, without breaking confidentiality. If we have our electric Mustang coming. I got to go in to do a group where we were trying to figure out what that's going to sound like. With electric cars, you miss out on the sound of an engine. So they brought in groups to listen to the different replica of what an engine would sound like. And so, got to weigh in on that. I've gone in and done tests through the company. I had a bushier beard before all of this started, and there was a focus group specifically for men with beards, because we're using more facial recognition, and they wanted to make sure that the facial recognition software was going to work with men with beards, because again, it's a global company. There's a lot of beards in the world, so that was an opportunity to again use not just what I would tell you having a beard is like, but using the tech to tell what the computer, what the algorithms that are reading my face are going to tell you in that moment.
Right.
So again, that's one way that we're doing it. And then there's your more traditional external market research, things like that, where we either hire a vendor or use some of our design thinking professionals to go out and do these kinds of research. But yeah, no, it is one of my favorite things about the company is just how much research in any one moment. There's, I don't want to say dozens, but there are tons of studies, surveys, and research going on here at the company that, again, I never, before I started working here and started seeing the emails, I never would have expected how much goes into making human-centered design work on a global platform.
Right. And I mean, based on that too, now we can really understand why Ford has been Ford and in business for so long, because
Sure.
you are taking that time to invest in your customers and really understand what is the climate like? What are we working with? So that makes
Sure.
sense. And it looks like we have time for maybe one more question. We got quite a few questions. This last one is a fun one for you, Billy. Pretty
Okay.
interesting. We had a student ask, do self-driving cars need windshield wipers? And when you think about that, maybe so, maybe not. So how would you use design thinking to maybe come to a conclusion about whether they should or not?
Sure. So I think the key thing to think about here is it that the car needs the windshield wiper, or do the passengers within the car need the windshield wiper to feel
Right.
safe? And so
Right.
that's one of the things as we talk about autonomous vehicles. The question has to be, how are we going to get people to get into these cars? Not just how are we going to get them to buy them, how are we going to get them to understand them, but how are we going to get them to reliably get in and feel safe and comfortable in a car? So I would say, maybe we put someone in a car that's on, we've got cars that go around all the time. If you're a passenger in a car, we can have it so that the windshield wipers don't cut on. Maybe we drive you around for a little bit there, and then we interview you and we find out, did you feel safe? Did you feel so? Maybe for the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to have those windshield wipers, but eventually as people get adjusted to the cars, those, that feedback will look like we can cut that cost out of the production. But no, that is the real world kind of research that we do here. It's a unique, it's a unique question, but it requires a very real solution. So no, I think that is a fun one. I have, again, to not break confidentiality, I've done a self-driving study on would people enjoy, and again, I might be breaking confidentiality here, but would people enjoy a car that can give them like a back rub while they're just riding around? Because the car's doing the driving now. Can the car drive and you get a nice deep tissue massage from your car seat? I'm sure that came up in the brainstorming concept, and someone was able to put together a prototype. And so I got to sit in a car and get my back rubbed, because that's design thinking.
Right. Great.
So
well,
20
Billy,
years from now, if you've got a car that will give you a massage as it's
right.
driving you around.
Yeah, we heard it first right here, everybody. We heard it first. Well, Billy, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to be conscious of everybody's time on the Zoom meeting. I know we're